All right, we're in 1 Samuel chapter number 17. In the last chapter, we saw how that God had chosen David as the new king, and he sent Samuel to anoint him. But Samuel began to look at the older, bigger sons of Jesse, and God shared with him that, he was looking on the outward appearance, but God looks on our hearts, and I'm thankful for that. But God removed his spirit from Saul, and his spirit came on David. So now, and it's going to still be just a little while before David actually becomes king. A lot of things are going to happen. Saul is going to try to begin to try to kill him, but God's not going to allow that to happen. But chapter 17, another good chapter, shares a very familiar story about David and Goliath. And we're going to begin in verse 1. It says, "Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shokoth, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shokoth and Azekah in Ephesdanim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the other side, on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them." So, and we've seen already in a couple of 2 or 3, 4 chapters or so, how that Israel had a problem with the Philistines. And we have now, they're gathered and ready to go to battle, and the Philistines are on top of one mountain, and Israel's on top of the other, and they're kind of overlooking a valley where they have been battling. But now we have a rather large person that comes on the scene. "And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span." And I know all of our Bibles probably share something a little different. Mine says that is 9 feet and 9 inches. But he was a big man. A lot bigger than most, especially in this time period. Now, but he's huge, and that's why he's the champion. Nobody can beat him. "And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass," which is about 125 pounds, just for the armor across his chest. 125 pounds. "And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders." So, he's very well equipped with armor. But he's a big enough person that can handle and carry this large amount of weight besides himself. If he's 9 foot 9 inches tall, he's probably got anywhere from a size 16 up to a 20 or 21 size foot. So, that's a huge foot. And then when you begin to look at all these things, the height, and he could probably weigh 400 or 500 pounds and still look pretty skinny.
Well, Shaq, the basketball player, he's 7'2" and weighed close to 400 pounds. So,
and he doesn't look fat.
Yeah.
He just looks kind of muscular, and he can carry a lot more weight than just the average person. "And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him." And that just the head of his spear weighed about 15 pounds. You know, that's more than the weight of a common person's staff and head for a spear. So just the spear head weighed 15 pounds. You know, he's rather large, and he's able to be accommodated with large equipment to go to battle. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. So, you know, he begins to taunt them. You know, here I am. Choose you out somebody from your side and send them out here. We'll go to battle. But, you know, he just continually taunts them, but, you know, he's going to get what's coming to him. And he goes on to share, if he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall you be our servants and serve us. Hey, you know, all these Israelites, including Saul, you know, they didn't have their faith in the right place, because they were shaking in their boots. Every time Goliath spoke, they were afraid. You know, if you study out Scripture, you know, really the Bible shares with us not to fear man. And because what can man do to you? If we stand for God, if somebody does kill this body, that's all they can do. Jesus said, don't fear man, fear the one that can kill your body and soul by casting it in hell. In other words, he says, fear God. But, and also Scripture shares with us that God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love. And so, but all of Israel were shaking in their boots. Here's this huge man standing out here. They'd probably never seen anybody this tall. Probably the tallest person they'd ever seen was Saul. Because if you remember it, he was kind of head and shoulders taller than everybody else. So, but now they see an extra large guy, and they're shaking in their boots. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Or just send somebody out here. Let me, you know, he had no regard of the size or who it was. Just send them out here. I'll show you I can defy the armies of Israel. But, you know, he's already shared that, you know, if you kill me, all of us will be your servants. But if I kill the one you send out here, then you're going to be our servants. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. How sad. But you know, we read in the last chapter where God had taken his spirit from Saul. Saul was really no longer following or trying to do anything that God had wanted him to do. And you know, if we get out of the will of God, and it can happen, you know, God can also chastise us and kind of remind us of where we should be at. So, but you know, he had given Saul opportunity to turn from his own desire, but Saul didn't take that. And so now, when this Philistine Goliath speaks, Israel is dismayed. They're greatly afraid. And now David was the son of the Ephraite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 oldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle, and the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. So, and we read about those last week. Those were 3 that were named that Samuel began to look on them. Surely this is the one God's going to anoint as king because of their size, and these looked like they'd be people that could fight real good, lead an army. But that's not what God wanted. God knew these men's hearts. So here, these 3 sons of Jesse had went with Saul to battle against the Philistines. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So, David, he's wanting to see what's going on somewhat, but then we're going to see his dad's going to send him over also. And Jesse said to David his son, "Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge." So Jesse says, David, you take all this food and you go over there and you give this to your brothers and this to the ones that's over them. Just see how they're doing. Go check things out for me. Jesse may be at the point in his life that it's easier for his son to travel and bring him news back. So, and David was ready and willing to go because he wants to see what's going on. But also, God had a plan in this. God's will was coming together with Jesse. Hey, David, you go down there and take this food over there. It was going to ultimately bring about God's will. So, David didn't argue. He was ready to go over there. He might have been just a tad nosy about what his brothers were doing. Are they ready to fight? Is the Israeli army ready to stand up against the Philistines? Verse 19, now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to fight and shouted for the battle. So, here he is. He's right here at the battle and he's shouting for Israel. He's kind of the cheerleading section at this point. He's cheering them on. Get them. So, that's an idea he had of taking this food over there. I'll get to see what's going on. I'll probably get to see some battles. And that's what he was going to get to see. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage and ran into the army and came and saluted his brethren. So, he leaves his carriage, he comes, he sees his brothers, he's speaking to them, and but his brothers are not too pleased. As he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words. David heard them. See how God's got his hands on this? Here David is. He's come to this battle. He's come to see about his brothers for his daddy. He's brought this food. He gets there. They're in a heated battle. He's cheering Israel on. Then he begins to hear the words of Goliath and the things that he's saying against God's army. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. David's seeing something maybe that he didn't think he was going to see. Israel and her army running. afraid because of this one man, because of Goliath. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man that has come up, surely to defy Israel? Is he come up, and it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. In other words, if you can kill Goliath, you're going to get anything you want. I like watching the movie Armageddon sometime. And, when they're getting ready to go up into space to blow up this asteroid, they're at NASA, and they're given, each of them have written a letter, and they're wanting 8-track tapes back. They don't want to pay taxes the rest of their life. They're just all kind of crazy. I want to sleep in the White House. And hey, who killed Abraham Lincoln? This kind of, who killed John F. Kennedy? And they're asking all kind of. And here if they could kill Goliath, they could have about what they wanted. All the riches they wanted. It'd be really tax-free living in Israel because of defeating this one man. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth the Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? Now we've got a man here, or actually he's still a young boy. He's not been in any battles other than taking care of sheep. But who is this man? What is that again the person will get if he defeats this man? This man's defying the army of the living God. Who does he think he is? So, we can see that David, he's thinking more about, hey, you know what? This man is speaking bad against our God. And David, just like Scripture says, God himself said about David that David was a man after God's own heart. So he knows God is able to take care of this giant. And it's the same thing in our lives today. No matter how big a problem may seem, if we'll have faith in God, if we'll trust Him, what can stop us? It's not saying we won't have problems and troubles and trials, and we're going to have those as long as we're in this life. But if we trust God, we'll make it through every one of them. And that's what David is trying. Who is this person that defied the army of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that killeth him. So, you're going to get Saul's daughter for your wife. You're going to get all these riches. Pretty much, you're not going to have to pay tax. You're going to just live scot-free in this country if you take care of this man named Goliath. And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and said, why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. So Eliab's like, why are you down here, you little runt? All you want to do is come down here and just see a battle, and then you're going to run home and tell Daddy about it, and that's all you're down here for. He's upset that David's even come. What about them few sheep we got over there? Who'd you leave them with? Why are you away from them? Last week we read how he was a ruddy, young person, a keeper of the sheep. And that's the way his brothers think of him. So, David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. People answered again, after the former manner. So, David's like, why are you upset? If y'all were to be out there battling Goliath, he's defying the armies of God. And, he's kind of getting on his brother, and you're upset because I'm here? You ought to be upset that rascal's out there running his mouth. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with the Philistines. Hey, Saul, y'all quit shaking in your boots. I'll go. I'll go down there and fight that fellow. That's what God wants in us. A song we sing sometimes, Keep on the Firing Line. In that song, it shares how that God doesn't want a coward in his service. How can we serve God and not be willing or able to take a stand on God's word? Hey, we're not budging from this. And that's where David's at. Hey, you know what? Saul, y'all quit worrying about it. Don't have a heart attack because Goliath's out there running his mouth. I'll go fight him. What a stand for God. And Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. David, you're not old enough to go out there and battle him. You're a keeper of the sheep. This man Goliath, he's been a soldier since his youth. But David wasn't trusting in his own strength. David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. Hey, I beat up and killed a lion and a bear for trying to take one of my sheep. This big Philistine out here, he's no different. I'm going to go to battle for God. And that's what he was trusting in. This man is defying the armies of God. This man is mocking God. But David knew that our God had all power. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivereth me out of the paw of the lion, and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, the Lord be with thee. He's standing over there shaking in the corner, hiding. And when David begins to take that kind of stand, hey, God was with me when I killed that lion and that bear. That same God will be with me when I go out against this man. That same God will defeat this man. And, I kind of, as I was studying this week, I kind of imagined, I like to get into Scripture, but I kind of imagined Saul just kind of peeking out from under a blanket. Said, go ahead, you go out there and fight him, and then cover him back up because he's so scared, But look at the bravery of David, him willing to take a stand for God. All the army of Israel, not one of them wanted to go up against this huge man. But then you have a shepherd, a little young boy coming there. I'll go up against him. God will fight the battle. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. So, here, David, here's all of my armor, put it on, and you can go out. But, you know, Saul's a big man too. How could Saul expect this armor to fit David? And Saul armed David with his armor and put a helmet of brass upon his head, also armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off of him. I can't use this. I've never battled in any kind of armor on. Here, I'll leave this here. You know, basically he's sharing with Saul, hey, I'm going to just stand in God's power. It's like what Paul shared in Ephesians chapter 6. Put on the whole armor of God. That's the armor David had on. That's the only armor that's the only armor we need today. When we go out into this world and stand up for Christ, we need that armor of God on. Because God's with us. And he took his staff in his hand and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in the hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So, you know, there's a lot of speculation on why he picked up all these stones, 5 stones. You know, there's people, well, he was afraid if he missed with the first rock, he'd have another. Maybe Goliath had 4 other brothers. And possibly. He had a whole Philistine army down there with him. 5 stones weren't going to take care of a whole Philistine army. But for whatever reason, he picked up 5 stones. 5 smooth stones. But yet, he's still the only one that's trusting God. He's the only one that is saying, hey, you know what? God's going to fight the battle. God's going to win this. God will take care of this. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. When the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained her. He was, what? He was kind of, why? What in the world? He said, for he was but a youth and ruddy and a fair countenance. They sent this little boy out here to battle with me. You know, Goliath he's laughing. This is the best y'all got over there in Israel? A young boy. He doesn't have a sword. He doesn't have a spear. All he's got is a slingshot. And 5 little rocks. You know, how...
He had to get his wind at an elevation with the 5 rocks.
Yeah.
You had to make sure you got it just right.
And the Philistine said unto David, am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. You're going to come out here with me and all you got's a slingshot? What do you think you're going to do with that? Do I look like I want to fight a youngin? You know, but he's willing to take on anybody that wants to come on him. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. You come on down here closer, and I'm going to kill you, And we're going to leave you laying right here, and the buzzards are going to eat you. And, it is, I just can't understand why the whole army of Israel were shaking in their boots. They serve a God that they know what this God can do. They know that from what in their heritage has been passed down, all the things that God had done for them. And yet, they're scared of one thing: Goliath. No matter how big a problem we might be facing, our God is much bigger. He can take care of anything, no matter what. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. You've come to me with all this 300 or 400 pounds of armor and 15-pound spear. There's no telling how much his sword weighed. But he says, David says, I've just come to you, against you in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, whom you've defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. David wasn't backing down. The closer he gets to the Goliath, the more he's got to look up. This is a huge man. But he says, he doesn't back down. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. And he doesn't say maybe, he says, I will smite thee. Look at the trust and the belief in God that David has. Goliath, you might be a big old rascal, but my God's about to take you down. The fowls of the air is going to eat your carcass. I'm going to cut your head off. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. That's why, and I know maybe this is kind of sore subject, but I know last summer, we had several different meetings about clubs and things that was going on at our high school, and I pray for all those that are over us in our Board of Education and all this. They've got I wouldn't want their job, but for the life of me, I've prayed and prayed, God, help me to understand why we back down from something that seems huge and think it's bigger than you are. Why do we get so caught up in money? Oh, it's going to cost us $1, rather than standing up for God. Look at what David's doing. He's coming up against a giant. He's coming up against a huge problem, but he's not backing down. God's going to deliver you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to cut your head off. Yeah, he's explaining to Goliath exactly what he's going to do. I didn't come to fight you with a spear and a sword, but in the name of the God of Israel. If we'll go into battle no matter what it is. When things don't look so good, if we'll go into battle with that kind of frame of heart, I tell you what, we'd see a lot of things probably done differently than if we just cower down and back up. You know, but David, he's ready. And he's sharing with Goliath, all this assembly shall know the Lord saveth not with sword or spear, the battle's his. And in verse 48 he says, and it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. It doesn't sound like David was shaking in his shoes. When that Philistine stood up, that's it. Here comes David. He's running to the battle. And I want to tell you that if we as Christians today would do that, instead of backing up, Christians have taken a back seat too long. We're afraid of what somebody's going to think. We're afraid somebody's going to think bad of us. You know, a fella came by my house yesterday. He was talking to me. I knew this man's daddy. And his daddy was a holiness preacher. And he was talking to me about when he was a youngin', said that his mom and daddy said the people in the church they went to said they'd kind of pull the youngins closer to the bench because he said, you know, when you went to church, there's going to be some shouting. It says, protecting the youngins, you know, from getting stepped on or whatever, you know. And he says, but you don't have to do that in churches no more. He said, everybody's afraid of what somebody's going to say something bad about you or whatever. And I shared with him, I said, well, I said, my daddy was born in Willacoochee, Georgia. And I said, back when he was a small boy, he said that when they lived in Willacoochee, they went to the Methodist church in Willacoochee at that time. And Daddy said that if you thought holiness churches did a lot of shouting, he said the Methodist church back in the early 30s probably did more shouting and lifting hands than the holiness churches did. But now, Lord have mercy, I've been to some churches, bigger churches. If you say amen, man, they're like, I mean, folks will just stop and turn around and look at you. I'm like, good Lord, they ain't never heard that word. There's nothing wrong with that word, don't, you know. But we've gotten to the point that we're afraid of what somebody's going to think or what somebody's going to say. But what if David had been like that? He'd run back home to his daddy, Jesse. But he didn't do that. He went running towards the problem. God's going to take care of you today. God's going to deliver you into our hands today. That's the kind of attitude God wants us to have. That's what God wants us to go forward in His work and do for Him. I heard a preacher Sunday on the radio on the way home. He was talking about how that when he was growing up, and I could relate to what he was saying because I remember how my mom and daddy was. That you might be running around outside, and he said, you might be running around and playing in parts of the house, but if your parents and other adult guests in your house were sitting around the table drinking coffee or whatever, when you come through that kitchen, you slowed down at a walk and walked through and you didn't say nothing. Because now, Mom and Daddy, and they taught it when grown-ups was talking, you didn't run up there and interrupt them. You just didn't do that. But what they were doing was teaching respect and this kind of stuff. But, you know, there's not a lot of that today. And it's sad. That's the road our world's headed down. And it's pointing right to the coming of Jesus.
And it's our generation that got away from it. we didn't teach our children what our parents taught us.
Yep. That's for sure. So David ran. He ran towards the problem. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. Here's a young boy, maybe just say somewhere between 16 and 20 years old. He's got his sling. He's got that thing going with that rock in it, and he slings out there, hits Goliath right between the eyes. God guided that rock. David shared with him, God's going to deliver you into our hands today. God guided that rock to the right place. It sunk into his forehead. It killed him instantly. He fell out on his face. You know, I mean, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Just that little sling and a rock. And his trust in God. His knowing and believing that God was going to take care of the problem. You know, a lot of times that may be why we don't see things, you know, changed or fixed or whatever how you want to put it, is because we don't go at it with that kind of attitude. Hey, God's going to change this. Because God can. That's evidence right here. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of the sheath thereof and slew him and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. When they saw this 9-foot rascal laying down on the dirt, they're like, oh, it's time to go from here. They've got something else fighting for them. They had a young boy. How amazing God is. It doesn't matter the age of a person. I remember several years ago over in Lakeland, and I want to say it was at the Church of God in Lakeland, but I'm not positive. There was an 11-year-old boy that was going over there right regular preaching. And I had somebody to ask me about that. What do you think about that? I said, well, if he's preaching God's word, what's wrong with it? If God's called him to preach, who am I to question that? God can use anybody at any age. That's between him and God. But too many times we look at things a lot different. Oh, that person, you know, they're just putting on a show. But David, he wasn't putting on a show. He was trusting God, and God took care of the problem. When the other Philistines saw that Goliath was, hey, David standing on top of him, got his sword, and he's cutting his head off, they went running in the other direction. The tide had turned. You know why? Because David trusted God. Out of all the armies of Israel there, I don't see here where it said every one of them began to believe and get behind David. David was right by himself. Because he trusted God and believed in God. Because of that one young boy, the whole Philistine army was running in the other direction. You know, that's how great God is. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and persuaded or pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Shaaraim, even unto Gath and to Ekron. So once they see David has, hey, you know what, he's killed that big old rascal, they come out of the, they come out from under their cover from shaking, and, you know, now they're shouting. They should have been shouting beforehand. Hey, you know what? It don't matter what the Philistines throw at us, God's going to take care of it. That's what David did. He went out there all by himself. They were shaking up here behind the trees and rocks, but when he took care of, when God took care of it, here they come out running and shouting, hey, y'all didn't win. God did. But you know what? If you really look at this scripture, and it says that, David shared with them that when God took care of this problem, when God delivered Goliath into his hand, he said in the last part of verse 46, he says, then they'll know that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. David knew it. But not only did the Philistines finally realize it, but you know what? Those Israelites realized they had a God. David's the only one out of the whole shebang there that believed God was going to take care of it. So, how wonderful. So they chased them. And, their wounded fallen by the way. And then verse 53, and the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. So then, they run in and they get all the loot. Hey, this stuff belongs to us now. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this you? Abner said, as thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And, he pretty much didn't want to tell him the truth. They're seeing something different in David. God's Spirit is on David. We saw that last week, how that God took his spirit from Saul, and how that spirit was put on David. And the king said, inquire thou whose son this stripling is. Whose son is it? Where'd this young'un come from? And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. Could you imagine this young boy? I mean, he's toting around pretty much on a platter the head of Goliath. Could you imagine that? He's cut this guy's head off, and he's got it, whether he's toting it on a platter or just toting him around by the hair of the head, he's got this man's head.
It's probably big as a basketball.
I was thinking the same thing.
His head probably weighed 70 or 80 pounds or more, But here David is because he trusted God. No matter the problem we face, if we'll trust God. And I know a lot of times we get kind of a preconceived idea. We've done got it worked out in our mind how God ought to do things, and then when it don't work out that way, we think God hadn't done anything. But we need to get that. That's what the devil wants us to think. Hey, you know what? The way you're thinking, that's the way it should go. But we should be just like David. God, whatever your will is, you're going to take care of this problem. And God did that. God blessed him. Here he is floating around Goliath's head because he trusted God. Out of all the Israeli army, here's a little shepherd boy that came and trusted God. He just told the king, hey, I killed a bear and a lion for attacking my sheep. God blessed me to do that. He'll bless me to take care of this. How amazing God is. It seems impossible that somebody here, David, who really had no training as far as being a soldier, comes in And he shines like the stars of heaven. And you know why? Because he trusted God. That's the whole key to everything. Even in the day and hour we live in, that's the whole key to everything, that we trust God. We know that he can do all things. That's all God wants from us. And then the last verse says, and Saul said to him, whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Now, if you remember when God told Samuel to go over there to the house of Jesse, hey, if I go over there, Saul's going to get mad. He's going to kill me. God said, well, take you some animals over there to sacrifice. So you're going over there for a sacrifice. And that's what he was doing. He was going to sacrifice unto God because God was anointing a new king. So he knew that Samuel had been over there, so it's kind of leading up to Saul's about to have some bad feelings towards David. And we're going to see that next week. So, anybody have anything on these verses?